Well, hello everyone. We are going to be talking about sports nutrition today with Dr. Tracey Teasdale, who is a naturopathic doctor, focuses on endurance and sports nutrition. Welcome, Dr. Tracey.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So tell us what exactly is sports nutrition and what is the difference between normal nutrition that we all eat and sports nutrition?
For sure. So, regular nutrition usually looks at kind of optimizing nutrient density of the food and just making sure that people are, generally like lowering their carbohydrates and reducing their salt content and those kinds of things. With sport nutrition, it's actually a little bit different. So, what we're looking at doing is matching the diet intake and the quality and the types of to a person's sport event. So there's a variety of different types of sports that we can work with, and they use different types of fuel. So we just want to make sure that we're matching those appropriately. Athletes also just tend to burn a lot more calories than a sedentary person would. So then it's an increase in caloric intake, making sure they're getting enough protein into their day to support the training that they're doing and the recovery afterwards. Optimize carbohydrate intake as well so that there's some fuel in the muscles ready to go. And looking at hydration and electrolyte status as well. So there's lots of fun stuff to talk about there.
Sure, sure. So just walk us a little bit. Let's say that you're working with an athlete, right? And from what I'm understanding, the working with the athlete would be a little bit different than a swimmer or some other sports. Is that how it works? Or is it just kind of like a blanket, anyone who's a sports person?
Yeah, anybody who's involved in sport or physical activity or just enjoys being active can benefit from sport nutrition and a tailored approach to that intake.
Okay. So let's just talk about a normal person, like what we are supposed to take as a normal person, like you and me, like, protein, carb, and what is the, what is the you're going to recommend, right, for an athlete? What is the difference
Yeah.
exactly? Apple to apple. Yeah.
Yeah, so the biggest thing is protein content. The
Um,
RDA for protein is 0.8 grams per kilogram body weight, which is kind of the amount to prevent like deficiency and like frank disease. But that's not necessarily optimal, even for kind of sedentary people or generally active people. But when you move into more of a performance nutrition perspective, we're actually increasing that sometimes upwards of like 2 to 3 grams per kilogram. So sometimes even tripling the regular recommended dose of protein,
wow.
which is pretty significant, right? So it's, and then the timing of that as well. So we want to make sure that we're pairing, we're getting like a dose of protein frequently throughout the day so that it helps to improve overall protein synthesis within the muscle. Whereas a sedentary person might not need to worry as much about the timing. Definitely want to be thinking about that as well. The other piece that we often will talk about too is like eating before bed. So I know that's like a big no-no for most people. You hear don't eat don't snack after dinner, don't eat anything after dinner. It's really bad for you, etc. But for athletes, it's really important because the biggest surge in growth hormone, which is kind of the biggest repair hormone that we have in our body and helps build us kind of big and strong, that surges overnight. So if we can pair nutrition right before bed, that they actually kind of like you get the nutrition in the bloodstream right when growth hormone's ready to use it. And so that's sort of another really big difference.
So what kind of nutrition before bed? Is it like after dinner and then there's a nutrition before you go to bed? Is that what you're
Yeah.
saying, right? Yeah.
Yeah. For some athletes, that can really help to boost their performance and improve their sleep quality too, which is kind of nice. Everyone could use a little bit more.
So, and what about the other intake, like carbohydrates, fats, and what about other things?
Yeah. So generally speaking, when I talk kind of general nutrition to patients, we want to minimize simple carbohydrates, right? So kind of like your white breads and things that can spike your blood sugar more quickly because that can just kind of throw off people's energy and mood and things like that as well. So we're often like trying to reduce that and increasing fiber as well. Whereas in sport nutrition, sometimes that's not actually great. We do sometimes want that really quick fuel. Like if you're heading out for a run and you haven't had a chance to eat anything, you want something that's going to be metabolized and give you that quick fix of blood sugar because you're going to use it, right?
Yeah.
And then we also, like in that particular situation, wouldn't want to be having a lot of fiber because that actually helps, like it sits longer in our stomach and causes a lot of gastrointestinal distress. So cramping, discomfort, sometimes like having to run to the bathroom as well. So those are kind of with carbohydrates, the two biggest things that we change. We actually will recommend more simple carbohydrates more frequently, specifically around or during activity. Whereas for population, we're like, let's go fiber.
And fats? What about the fats, the healthy fats? What about those?
Yeah, super important for athletes as well. A lot of our hormones are made out of fat, and so those are really important to support kind of bone health as well. We make, like, estrogen is a big promoter of bone health, and estrogen is made from dietary or from fats in our body. So we do need to make sure we're getting enough fat in. But again, it sort of is the same idea with the carbohydrates, right? We don't necessarily want to have a high fat meal right before we go out for a run or go play hockey, where the sport is, because again, it's going to sit there and not feel very good. So it's about doing those things appropriately.
And what about the other like vitamins or supplements? I mean, a lot of athletes, at least, I mean, I'm not obviously an expert, but you read that they take a lot of supplements. So you also kind of balance their needs along with recommending some supplements?
For sure. So to make energy in our body, so to take fats and carbohydrates and proteins and make ATP, which is like the usable form of energy in our muscles, we need B vitamins. And so we burn through them a lot faster if we're under a lot of stress, or if we're really active, and specifically endurance athletes, because they're out there for hours and they're just creating ATP over and over and over again. They need lots of vitamins. So that's one of the ones that I'll often look at and recommend. We can test a few in the blood as well, so things like B12, and then also ferritin, or iron. Ferritin is a measure of iron stores, but iron is what creates hemoglobin in our blood, and that's what carries the oxygen to our blood or to our muscles. So, and that helps us make energy. So if we're low in iron, we might not be able to carry oxygen, which means it limits our exercise capacity essentially. And when you tie that into endurance athletes, they lose iron through kind of like what we call foot strike hemolysis. So that's just constant pounding of the feet on the pavement. So we break down red blood cells there. They lose some through sweat, and also through a little bit of GI distress as well. So that's one of the things that we definitely like to run. There's also vitamin D is a huge one for us. In Canada, today's like one of the sunniest days we've had for a while, which is so, but we're mostly deficient, and even across North America, most people are going to be deficient in vitamin D. So that's a really easy one to test and to take and to dose appropriately. It has an impact in terms of immune system function, and also sports performance and muscle repair. So it's pretty important. Those are the big ones I look at.
Okay, so there's a test. So let's say an athlete comes to you. Would you do the testing, kind of like see what the blood test or some type of test, and then kind of recommend the diet, and then after their performance in the athlete, then again a test? I mean, how does this whole process work?
Yeah, so it's always really individualized. Everyone comes to me with different types of needs and different lifestyles. So first, we'll look at all of that, and we decide whether or not testing is necessary. But if performance is the main concern, then we often do one of those tests just to make sure that we're getting optimal levels. So we run as a baseline, and then if we need to, we intervene or prescribe the nutrients that we need, and then we can retest at a later time. So usually like 3 months later. But we'll often do as their performance improves. That's a pretty good indicator as well.
Yeah. And then someone who's trying to do triathlons and marathons, I mean, they would also fall into this category of what you're talking about. I mean, that you kind of, right? Is that?
For sure, yeah. And so with those kinds of sports, the other piece that we do is like nutrition during the exercise. So if they're doing marathons, they can be out there anywhere from like 2 hours and 20 minutes up to 6 hours, depending on how long they're out there. So then we think about like carbohydrate availability and making sure they're not going to like bonk or hit the wall, right? Is the infamous like heartbreak hill in the Boston Marathon where everyone kind of crashes. So look at hydration and carbohydrate supplementation during exercise as well, and just making sure that that those are being sustained. And then of course there's the like after fueling, just to make sure that you're replenishing all of that and ready to go for the next time.
Okay, what else would you like to talk about and tell the users who probably are thinking of, gearing up for a marathon or a triathlon? How should they start this journey? They need to obviously consult with someone like you, or
Yeah.
they should really do something on their own, which most of us end up doing, right?
Yeah, there's tons of information on the internet, right? And not all of it's accurate.
Yes.
And specifically in the sport nutrition world, there's a lot of like kind of bro science, right? Where it's people bring what worked for them and they assume it's going to work for everybody else. And that's not necessarily accurate, right? So we want to take a look at what the data says, and we want to use like an evidence-informed way to that we're not wasting people's time and money, and we're optimizing that we're doing.
Well, thank you so much. I think this is a great information. We've never done this session on sports nutrition and endurance. We always talk about medical ailments. So this is such a fresh breath of air, that people need to understand if they're thinking of, planning to do marathons or triathlon. They need to take the nutrition a bit more seriously. That's all, right?
For sure, yeah. And one of the reasons I'm so passionate about working with athletes and physical activity and specifically is that it has, if we could put physical activity into a pill, it would cure almost everything, right? All the we're used to talking about, it'll either cure or prevent them, right? And there's tons of data to support that. So the fun part of my job is like helping people get moving and feel good while they're moving and move as long as they want to, right? And as effectively as they want to. And a huge part of that is supporting recovery afterwards, and the largest part of that is nutrition. So it kind of all, it's like it all ties in.
Absolutely. No, nutrition is important. Food is medicine. We've been talking about this all the time, but this is really good. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Tracey, for sharing this information with us.
Thank you. Have a lovely day.
Yes, you too. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.